ASEAN Secretariat position. When I finish this one, I nearly called you John then, Sam, sorry. I'll then go and sit at the head table as well. So, ASEAN Secretariat position, ASEAN Secretariat position. Also, ASEAN Secretariat position. Right, cool, okay. I'm going to go and sit next to John.
Thailand, left hand. Yeah. Left arm. This one as well. It's just the arm. Oh no, it's just all the arms.
Yeah, the one you just sat in that shifted left, right?
Yeah, skewed. I say, next year, we hold it in Singapore.
Do you want to test this? Serious, I'm not joking. Just have a try though first.
To the long-standing and close defence relationship that Australia and the Philippines shares. We are, as we noted on that occasion and again this morning, absolutely committed to supporting the Philippines in efforts to defeat the terrorist threat that has emerged here in your country. We very much welcome the announcement yesterday that combat action in Marawi has ended. But I'd also like to say we're acutely aware, Mr Secretary, that these efforts to defeat the terrorists have come at a great cost to the people of Marawi and at a great cost to the armed forces of the Philippines. And my thoughts and the thoughts of Australia are with you and your country members at this time. We know that the spread of Daesh is a threat to our regional security, including, inevitably, therefore, the security of Australia. We also recognise that no single country is able to address the threat of terrorism on its own. It is all-pervasive. It knows no borders, and on that basis, we have to work together. We know that to prevent its spread, all the countries in the region do have to work cooperatively, and that is why Australia has been very committed to its support with the Philippines in recent months in this task. I can confirm this morning that Secretary Lorenzana and I have agreed a new range of measures which we spoke about on the last occasion that I was here in our first discussion on this matter, that will see our two countries increase our cooperation to support the Philippines Armed Forces in addressing the challenges that are posed by modern-day terrorism. The ADF will provide mobile training teams that will begin providing urban warfare, counter-terrorism training in the Philippines in the coming days. It's very practical training by the ADF which will provide and support the Philippines Defence Force to be able to counter what are very brutal tactics employed by terrorists. Through our significant involvement in the last couple of years in the counter-Daesh campaign in Iraq and Syria, Australia has acquired skills and knowledge that we are able to share with the Philippines Armed Forces. As part of our increased cooperation, we've also agreed to work together to enhance intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance in the southern Philippines, to strengthen our information sharing arrangements and to enhance our maritime security engagement and bilateral maritime patrols. Together, Australia and the Philippines will co-host a multi-agency civil, military and law enforcement seminar on post-conflict rehabilitation efforts later this year. This seminar will draw on lessons from past operations and international and local civil military police expertise. These measures together will strengthen our ability and the ability of the governments in the region, but here specifically the Philippines, to combat this terrorist threat over the long term. This enhanced training support will include a number of elements, and I'll just go through those briefly. The Australian Army will provide training to the Philippines Army and the Philippines Marine Corps. This training will be conducted on Philippines military bases. It will involve a range of skills related to combat in urban environments. It will involve information sharing and experience sharing to ensure that we are best able to use the skills that we have to hand. The Royal Australian Navy will conduct ship visits to the Philippines that will involve a range of cooperative activities to support the development of capacity in the Philippines Navy. This cooperation will begin with an Australian patrol boat visit in the next month. Our P3 Orion maritime patrol aircraft have been operating in support of the fight in Marawi for some months now, and the Secretary and I have discussed their activities in the last couple of days. Now that the Secretary of National Defence, Lorenzana, has declared the end of combat operations in Marawi, we have been reviewing with the Philippines the need for that continuing engagement, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance support, and we will work with the Philippines to address that in the coming days. Australian experts from military and civilian agencies will, as I said, conduct a seminar here in the Philippines, which is focused on the benefits of a whole-of-government response and approach to reconstruction, recovery and rehabilitation. We're also going to increase our intelligence cooperation, including expert advice on countering Daesh-inspired social media narratives. We know that the battle against terrorism doesn't just occur in the physical combat zone. It occurs in the internet zone. It occurs in the cyber world to a degree that it is perhaps difficult to appreciate unless you are very, very focused on that, and this is something which we've been very conscious of in Iraq and in Syria. This package of activities has been developed in very close cooperation with our friends in the Philippines, and we are confident that it will provide the sort of support to the AFP, who have worked so very, very hard at the effort in Marawi, that will help to build capacity to deal with the threat from terrorist groups. In addition to our strong Philippines-Australian defence relationship, the region needs the cooperative effort of our ASEAN neighbours to keep Daesh's aspirations in Southeast Asia in check and to prevent it from spreading further. All of us, all of the nations in the region and further afield, have to learn from what has happened here recently, and I know that Secretary Lorenzana and his counterparts in the ASEAN Defence Ministers have shared discussions on that yesterday. I look forward to further discussions in the ADMM Plus today, and I'm very pleased that Australia is able to offer this practical engagement and support to the Philippines, to our friends here in the Philippines, and I look forward to working together further with Secretary Lorenzana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Lorenzana and Minister Payne. Now we will entertain questions. Kindly raise your hand, and the microphone will be handed to you. Please state your name, publication, and country. Manny, you will go first.
Good morning, ma'am, Madam Minister. You mentioned that there will be an urban warfare training soon. So may we know more details about that? How many troops will be involved? And how long will be the training? And is this a continuing exercise and training? So Australian troops will be rotated in the Philippines?
No, it's made up of mobile training teams, approximately 80 in total, who will go to the appropriate military bases as agreed with the Philippines Armed Forces and the Philippines government to provide the urban warfare training to work with the Army and with the Marines. The focus will be on conducting urban operations. If you think about the amount of work that Australia has done in Iraq, particularly in training, our efforts at Task Group Taji, just for one example, have seen us train over 26,000 members of the Iraqi security forces in their efforts in recent years. We also obviously worked closely with the Counter-Terrorism Service in Iraq. There's skills that we have acquired that we think it's important to share with the Philippines. Discussed it with Secretary Lorenzana. Equally, the Philippines Armed Forces have skills to share back to the Australians, frankly, as well, and it's very much a two-way street. But about 80 troops, I think I said.
Yeah, while we need troops now to be trained on urban warfare, we also need to build our capacity to have our own capability to train our troops. So part of the program that we are going to do in the near future is to build our urban fighting centers.
And also have a train-the-trainer component as well, which will ensure the skills are replicable here.
That's right.
Just, sir, a follow-up for Mr. Lorenzana. Sir, is Australia now the biggest source of our training program under the DCP?
I think they are one of the biggest, biggest source of our training programs for our people. We send so many people in every year. I don't know the exact number, but I know I was a beneficiary of the DCP way back then. Yeah, we send a lot. I think second only to the U.S. So they are huge. They're big up there. Yeah.
So the history of the DCP between Australia and the Philippines is a long and proud one.
Oh, yes.
It includes students in our defence colleges. It includes military-to-military exchanges. As I said, part of this will have an emphasis. Part of this particular program will have an emphasis on train the trainer. And this is in addition to our existing exercise program. So there is no diminution of our existing exercise program, which is a very, very effective one.
Okay. Hi, good morning. Please. Let me just shift gears to, I'm Andrew Calonzo from Bloomberg. Minister Payne, yesterday in your opening statement to the media, you said you will raise the behavior of the regime in North Korea in the ASEAN meeting. So I just want to get your thoughts on U.S. President Trump's repeated signaling in his tweets that he's open to the military options in dealing with North Korea. And to Secretary Lorenzana, as the ASEAN chair, did you sense any concern about the U.S. somehow pushing North Korea towards an armed conflict? And is there a concern that this might really this might really happen in the Korean Peninsula?
Andrew, thank you very much for your question. Let me be very clear about this. There is no question that the North Korean program of weapons development and testing is illegal. It is provocative. It is in breach of several United Nations Security Council resolutions. It is in breach of global agreements and international norms, frankly. And Australia has been extremely strong in reiterating our position, which supports that of the United Nations Security Council, supports that of the United States, which is that we will impose the strongest possible sanctions on the North Korean regime, both the sanctions agreed through the UN Security Council processes, but also in Australia's case a number of autonomous sanctions on both individuals and entities from North Korea. That will bring the strongest possible pressure to bear that we are able to on the regime. We as an international community need to make it very clear that their behaviour is illegal, it is destabilising and it is provocative. In my visits to Seoul recently, both in September and just 10 days ago, Australia has reiterated those messages with the Republic of Korea government, and we stand strongly with them in relation to that. In terms of the position that the United States has taken, I think what Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Mattis have made clear is that the greatest possible pressure must be brought to bear on the regime through the exercise of sanctions. But at the end of the day, the regime's behaviour is inherently dangerous to global stability, and the United States have made very clear that they will not entertain a threat to the continental United States. I think that is not surprising in the least. That is not unexpected, that position. But nevertheless, through whether it's the meeting here in the Philippines this week, whether it's the bilateral meetings that we have throughout the region, I encourage all of the parties in the region to exercise their strongest possible approach to sanctions. We have to maximise the pressure on the regime. We have seen it have effect. A number of the sanctions have relatively recently come into operation. We have seen effects starting, and I think it's important to maintain those as strongly as possible.
Yes.
The ASEAN, the ADMM has a joint declaration, and we included a part there about Korea's behavior. Sanctioning the behavior of Korea, and reminding North Korea to follow the United Nations resolutions. And so we are very concerned in ASEAN about the behavior of Korea, because we are very near, and we have nationals living in South Korea. If conflict erupts in the Korean Peninsula, then we have a lot of problems with our Filipino nationals there. And not only the Philippines, but also the other ASEAN nations are very concerned about the behavior, dangerous behavior, provocative behavior of North Korea. And I agree with Minister Payne that the action of North Korea is illegal.
Okay, please state your name and publication, sir.
Yeah. Good morning, Secretary and Minister. I am Jim Gomez. I'm with the Associated Press. I'd like to ask, the Australian military has one of the most focused intelligence monitoring of militants returning from Syria and Iraq to Asia. So to the extent that you can tell us, can you tell us what is Australia monitoring in terms of their numbers and plans? And how should the region respond to this potential threat? And to the Secretary, an extension of this question, how would you deal with the fact that these foreigners are continuously returning and could potentially go to Mindanao?
Jim, I think that's a very good question. We know that as the strength of Daesh in the Middle East, in both Iraq and Syria, has been diminished by the efforts of the international coalition, that foreign fighters who joined the ISIS, the Daesh efforts there, are in part looking to return to their origin, their homes of origin, and in recent times have also found it quite hard to get into Iraq and Syria. So are roaming, are not localised in those areas as much as they had been. So we are very focused on working with our neighbours in the region, working with the Philippines, working with Indonesia and Malaysia and Singapore, and in our own case, to be vigilant in terms of our border protection, vigilant in terms of our efforts to make sure that as far as possible, and it is very difficult to do, we have very porous borders in the region, as you know, but as far as possible we are tracking where people are travelling. It's not simple, however, it's a complex task across oceans, seas and land and air domains to try and do that. But it is important, I think, for us to work closely together. This is an issue I discuss regularly with my Indonesian counterpart, with my Malaysian counterpart, as to the challenges that we face. In Australia's terms, we are able to identify a number of individuals and families, family members who have travelled into the Middle East. We will obviously be vigilant in observing their movements as far as it is possible to do so. But for us, when you think about people who have been part of the Daesh campaigns in Iraq and Syria, they are battle-trained, they are battle-hardened, they are extremists of the highest order who have been prepared to do the most appalling things, using civilians as human shields, using civilians as collateral in their efforts to try and pursue their perverted ideology. So we are acutely aware of the sorts of people we are talking about. We are very focused on working with our counterparts. As whole of government responses, I think it's important to recognise it's not just a defence issue by any means. It's a national security issue, it's a border protection issue, it's a legal issue, it's an immigration issue, as well as a defence issue, and we work together closely with our counterparts, and I particularly value the relationship that I have with Secretary Lorenzana on this.
Yeah, even before the Marawi siege, we have already trying to coordinate with the neighboring countries, especially Malaysia and Indonesia, because early on we know that there were fighters, foreign fighters, local fighters who are fighting in the Middle East who would try to come back, and we have been forewarned by our friends fighting in the Middle East, Australia, the US, who have troops there, and so this has become a collective effort by the regional defense establishments. In fact, the first time that I spoke with Minister Payne over the phone was I was asking her to give us some information about returning fighters. And our talks progressed, and they ended up lending us some of their surveillance planes. But really, the effort doesn't stop. We continue to improve our capability to monitor the returning fighters. Recently, I got a message from our embassy in Baghdad, and they have this information from the Kurdish intelligence, and they have a list of names, long list of names of Malaysians and Indonesians fighting in Iraq. A couple of Filipinos who might come back, and so we are monitoring these people, and we welcome this cooperation that we get even from the Middle Eastern countries who want to help us. And also, of course, as mentioned a while ago, Australia is involved in the fight in the Middle East, and so there are people on the ground who have knowledge of what's happening on the ground, of the fighters who could find their way back to the region.
Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have this morning. We'd like to thank Secretary Lorenzana and Minister Payne for joining us
Thank
today.
you very much.
And we'd like to request our two ministers to please come to the front of the stage for a photo opportunity. Thank you very much to the media for coming today. I'm sorry for the short time that we have this morning. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone.